What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video in the Using R series. So in this video, we're going to cover how to rename your columns. So what I'm going to use here is a data set that I've used in a couple of my previous videos that's online retail sales. So I'll just read this data set in first, and we can just take a look at the column names because, again, that's all we're going to focus on here. And you can see that these are all kind of camel cased, right? So each word, each individual word starts with a capital letter. So we have the capital I for the invoice and the capital D for the date. So the first thing I'm going to show you is how you can transform if you have a set of columns like this and you don't want to keep writing them this way when you're working with your data in R. One of the things you can do is there's a really handy package called Janitor. So we're going to start by just looking at that. So I haven't loaded in the package, so I have to attach the package name to it. And the function is just called clean names. So if we run this and then we just specifically look at the names here, we see that all we did was running this janitor clean names function has produced our column names to now be snake case, which is everything's lowercase and new words are now treated as underscores instead of capital letters. So that's great. So we're actually going to use this data set here. So I'm going to delete this and I'm just going to rename this as sales. We're just going to overwrite what our initial sales data set is. So now if we look at our sales data set again, we see that we have these snake case columns. So let's say we wanted to just rename a single column. And for this case, what if we said, okay, stock code isn't actually correct. What we want to call it is stock ID instead. We would use our sales data set, and then we have a function in dplyr called rename. And you can see it has a .data argument, and then it has just a bunch of other arguments. And so all we need to do here is, because we're using this pipe from dplyr, we don't need to use the .data argument, as that's just fed in from what comes before the pipe. So what we need to do here is we have new column name, new column is equal to old column. So this is the way that you have to write this. Your desired column name comes first, and then your old column name comes second. So if we wanted to call stock code and make that stock ID now, we would want to have stock ID as our new column and stock code as our old column. And then if we run names on that again, we can see that we've gone from stock code here into stock ID by using this rename function. So this is a really handy function. The rename function is if you just have individual columns, you know what you want to call them and you know what you want to change them to. But that's not always going to be the case. Sometimes you want to change things from, say, all uppercase to all lowercase or something to that effect. And so with that, we can use a slightly different function. It's not called rename. Instead, it's called rename with. And so if we look at what rename with pops up on the tooltip, we see again the data. Again, we're just piping in from the sales data set, so that's all fine. And then we have function, and then we have calls, which defaults to everything. So if we don't specify what columns we want to do this on, it will just do it everywhere. So we have these columns on the right side of the screen that are all lowercase, and if we wanted to make them now all uppercase, the only argument we need to set is to upper. So if we just do sales, rename with to upper, and then again, I'm going to do names. So we just print out the column names. We see that by using rename with here, we can pass in a built-in function and it will make all of our column names uppercase. Same thing if we wanted to go here and we wanted to do to lower, this will just be what we had before, which is just this invoice number as lowercase. The other thing that we can do here is we can actually say that we want to use this rename with function, not on all of our columns, but only on a subset of them. So let's say we want to do to upper, but only if something starts with invoice. So if something starts with invoice, then we want to rename it to an uppercase variable. And so you can see here with running this code, we have invoice number is now uppercase and invoice date is now uppercase, but everything else is lowercase. We could do the same thing. We could do, instead of starts with, we could do ends with, and then we wouldn't want to do ends with invoice because nothing ends in invoice, but we could do it with, let's say, ID. So now if we look at to upper with the ends in ID, we only have one variable that ends in ID, and it's the customer ID, and now that's uppercase. So the final thing we're going to look at in this video is looking at renaming with a custom function. So we'll use sales, we'll use rename with, and now instead of passing in just an argument like to upper, let's say we wanted to pass in an argument like gsub, where we wanted to remove the underscore and make it a period instead. So because we're applying a function, we have to use the tilde, which is located above your tab key, if you haven't seen that before. And so what we want to apply here is we want to apply the gsub function. and we want to replace the underscore. We want to replace it with a period, and we're going to want to do that everywhere. So we can just do this .x function here. And then again, we'll call our names, and we can see that everywhere that we had an underscore, we now just have a period. And so again, let's just apply that with only a subset of our columns here. So we have rename with, and we want to do gsub underscore, replace it with a period, .x. And then instead of doing everything, right? So if we just pass in everything here, it's going to give us the same thing because it's applying it to all columns. But if instead we wanted to do something like starts with, and then invoice, and we do this, we now see that only our invoice number and our invoice date are separated with the period now, because it only applied this gsub formula to those columns that started with invoice. So that's how we use a handful of rename functions to rename the columns within our data set in R. I hope this video helped you rename some of your columns. And if there's something in particular you'd like me to help you figure out how to do in R, please let me know in the comments below. See you guys in the next one.